Hello, welcome to www.everydayhdr.com. My name is Blake Rudis, and today I want to talk about Topaz Clarity. Topaz Labs has created great plugins in the past, like Adjust and Detail and Black and White Effects 2, just to name a few, and now they've come out with their brand new epic, in my opinion, Topaz Clarity. So, I don't want to show you how to use Clarity, just jumping into it. Hey, these are the sliders and this is how you use it. I want to use it more for how it works its way into my workflow. Now, what you're seeing in front of you right now is a tone map 16-bit TIFF file that came from another outside program. And what I don't really care for, though, is how dirty it looks. And this typically happens in photographs, HDR photographs, where there's a lot of white. This church is very white on the inside, and by no means is this a great photo at all. It's a good photo for this example, for this tutorial, and if you don't have a photo of a church in your portfolio, you kind of have to have one. It seems like a spiral staircase and a church are the two must-haves in a portfolio. So this is my awesome, cool-looking church that's out in Weston, out here in Missouri. So, but what I don't like about this is how dingy and how dirty the walls look. It's not a dirty church. It's a very clean church. So, when this happens, I kind of toss that out of my workflow and start with something new. So what I did was I took all five of it was actually four photos, and brought them into Merge to HDR Pro. I went to File, Automate, Merge to HDR Pro, and I turned this into a 32-bit file. I don't want to show you the whole processing. It would take too long, and what I really want to get into is just how to get into Clarity right now. So, once you get a 32-bit image and Merge to HDR Pro, you're going to go up here and go to Mode and go to 16 bits. Now, you might be asking, why do we do a 32-bit just to turn it to 16-bit? Well, you kind of have to do that in order to use the filters. If you go over here to filters, you're not going to be able to use Topaz Labs on a 32-bit file. You're not going to be able to use many filters on a 32-bit file. So you have to turn this into a 16-bit file first. So that's what we're going to do. Turn it into 16-bit. And right here, it's going to bring up the HDR toning screen. I'm just going to do a very small amount of HDR toning to this. I don't really want it to be overly HDR toned. So I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit, maybe drop the gamma. Maybe increase the exposure a little bit more since I dropped the gamma. Increase the strength a little bit. Let's look at my shadows. I like my shadows the way they were. Maybe a little darker. Highlights. Bring them up. Bring them up. And it doesn't look like it's doing a whole lot, so we'll just leave that one alone. And I'm going to put a small little S-curve in here, because the S-curve is the way to be, right? Bring your darks down a little bit and your brights up a little bit. So that's HDR toning, just real quick right here in Photoshop. This is going to help us get into the clarity. Now, you have to go from 32-bit to 16-bit, okay? So this is how Clarity now is going to work into our workflow. Now it's a 16-bit file. We can go into Topaz Clarity. Now, when I was merging to HDR Pro and HDR toning, for that matter, you don't want something too dark, you don't want something too light, you don't want something too stylized. You want something that you can work with, because your stylization and all the stuff that's going to happen with your lights and your darks is going to come into programs like Topaz Labs, Clarity, I should say. So don't focus too strongly on getting an awesome HDR image right away, because as you can see, there's going to be a lot going on here in Topaz Clarity. So I'm going to go ahead and reset this and just give you the baseline of how Topaz Clarity works. Over here on the left, you're going to see your different presets. So, and it takes a little while to load them. It's a pretty new feature added to most Topaz programs that have been coming out lately. But why it takes so much time to load is it's loading all these very small previews of what your photograph is going to look like, which is a very cool feature. And not that it's a small photo; it's not a thumbnail. It's a little bit larger than a thumbnail, so it gives you a really good, accurate depiction as to what your photograph is going to look like. Up top, you're going to see how you can put the original and the processed image right next to each other up here. You can also do a 1-to-1, so you can see all the really nitpicky details inside. This will get you back out to a size that will fit on screen. You can also zoom and come back out. Now, that's all typical of most of your Topaz programs. You can go up here, you can look at the histogram, any mask that you might have, you can look at the loop and get really into those details. And we'll go ahead and leave that loop up for a little while, but then you got your navigator as well, where you can kind of look at your image and where you are on that image as you zoom in, and see the little blue box tells you where you are on your photograph. Now, moving into the cool parts. That's all the boring stuff. You just got to get it out of the way. The cool parts is in the clarity adjustments. They've really made this a very simple program. And by simple, I don't mean mundane at all. It's very powerful, and it can do a lot for your photographs. So don't think when I say simple that it's not worth it, because it's so worth it, and you'll see that in a second here. But they broke it down into two very basic parts. You've got your clarity and you've got your hue saturation. Now, if you know anything about clarity, clarity in Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw is going to be a global clarity adjustment. It's going to affect the whole thing globally, and it's going to be one single adjustment that's either all the way up, all the way down, somewhere in the middle, but you don't get any really in-depth control over the contrast effects that are happening in your photograph. With clarity, you have 7 different adjustment sliders that are affecting your contrast, essentially. And as you hover over them, it'll tell you what it's doing. You go to your micro contrast, it's the very small contrast. Low contrast is your shorter midtones. Medium is your midtones, and large is your shadows and highlights. Shadows by moving all the way to the left, or shadows by moving all the way to the right, and highlights by moving all the way to the left. Now, what I like to do, regardless of what the adjustment slider does, I really even don't kind of care what it does, because the way I manipulate these adjustments is I start by going all the way to the left with one, and then all the way to the right with the other, with the same one, and just kind of seeing what the effect happens. And then I find myself a nice place somewhere in the middle after I've adjusted it. And I do the same thing with the next one. I bring it all the way down, and then I bring it all the way up. And I don't like it all the way up. It's too dark. This is a beautiful church. I'm going to move it all the way down. I kind of like it all the way down. But I could go somewhere just a little bit higher to bring back some of that contrast as well. Then you have your medium contrast. Again, these are going to target your medium contrast variations. So we can bring that all the way up and see what happens. Again, too dark. And then start to bring that all the way down. Now, I'm not telling you that all of these adjustments will work for every single photograph, because they won't. But they will work for you can create your own preset and then use this on the next one. You might need to adjust these adjustments every time. That preset might be perfect for every one you do. It really depends on the dynamic range that was in the image to begin with. So there's no real way to say you have to put this at 0.30, you have to put this at 0.22. It doesn't really matter. You'll find that, especially if you do any editing for a long period of time, that no settings really are the same for every one of them. Now, if things start to get a little out of hand, you can come down here as far as your blacks and your black levels and your white levels and your midtones. You can adjust those independently as well too. I think that's like a double negative or something. So if I notice that the black level is getting a little too high, meaning there's a lot of black clipping that's going on, after I do those contrasts, I can come down here. If I like what's going on with those contrast adjustments, I can just leave those the same, but then come down here and modify that black level to either pull in more dark areas or push away those dark areas a little bit too. And that goes the same for midtones as well. And it's really just all about playing. Now, what I like to do also is just kind of see where I'm at here. Where did I start and where am I now? So there's the process version, there's the original version. I really haven't done a whole lot to this one to push it. So I'm going to bring this micro contrast up a little bit so you can see kind of how this works. Now, see that the micro contrast is usually where it's at. Whether you're using any tone mapping software or anything, the micro contrast is going to be the one that brings in all those really finite details. And if you look where we have it before, right about here, let's go ahead and take a 1:1 and look down here by the wood and the tile. Now, when we move that micro contrast up, look at what we're pulling out there. You didn't even see that detail in the tiles before, but now you're seeing that detail in those tiles. So if we move that micro contrast down, it's all just a blur, but now we're really pulling this stuff out. And the glory is we're doing it without halos. That's awesome. I really love what they've done with Topaz Clarity here. So, but then again, if when you bring the micro contrast up, if things start to get out of hand a little bit, you can go ahead and modify your midtones and your black levels to go ahead and get it back to where it belongs. So let's now look at our preview and our original and our processed. It's starting to look really good, in my opinion. You know, you're bringing out that detail, but you're keeping it the same. We don't have a dirty church now. Remember before we had that tone mapped effect, and it created a really dirty looking atmosphere. It took that noise that was in there and just compacted it so much that even noise reduction software thought that that was detail. That's what can happen in the tone mapping process. Is if any noise exists in that image, as you compress them, all those little noise particles start to bunch up, and even programs that would normally attack that noise think that that's detail, so it doesn't really attack it very well. Now, bypassing that, I went ahead and made a 32-bit file, changed that to 16-bit, did some HDR toning in Photoshop, and then came right into here with Topaz Clarity and really bumped this up. Now, not only can you do that, you can also add mask. Let's say there's an area on here that I didn't want to affect, and I'm not sure if there really is an area on here I didn't want to affect, but let's see the original and the before and the after. There's the original, there's the processed. And it doesn't really look like there's a whole lot of areas on here that I'm not a big fan of what just happened, but I'll just show you for grins anyway. So in the mask section down here, they've made it even easier than Photoshop masking, where black hides and white reveals. They've actually told you black hides, white reveals, and they give you different brushes. You can do an edge-aware brush where that will kind of pick out the detail areas. Like if I start painting on here, it's gonna go ahead and find those edges and make sure that those edges don't get affected by any of the masking. Or you can go ahead and just make that a normal brush and just paint right on, and it's going to go ahead and not affect those areas in that big chunk where it's not going to find any edges when you put it on normal. I kind of like the edge-aware one because it tells me that, hey, I'm getting a little too close to an edge or not. So if we go ahead and turn the mask on and off, you can kind of see the difference. And I kind of like what's going on back there. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my mask here. Yeah, okay. And I'm going to go to Edge-Aware. And I'm going to go and kind of hit this area back here a little bit, because it was bringing out a little bit, getting a little too dark back there. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that down a little bit. Now, what you can also do, say you don't really care too much for how strong this clarity effect is, you can just drop the opacity a little bit on here too and bring that opacity down a little bit. So you don't have to go, oh, oops, what happened there? You don't have to go full on with it. You can drop the opacity on it and make it maybe 50%, where it's more like an overlay of that clarity. You can look at the before and after. We still have a pretty good amount of detail coming out, even at 70%. But I kind of like it up there. You know how grungy I like my HDR images to be. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off that mask and go into one more feature down here. You have hue, saturation, and luminosity all packed into this nice little package here. So you have your main contrast adjustments, but during those main contrast adjustments, you might be affecting the color in the process as well. And you might be affecting the color in a way that you didn't want that the hue to change on the red, or the hue to change in the greens or the yellows in the process of adjusting the contrast, because that does happen. Now, you have total control over not just the saturation of the color, but also the hue and the luminosity of that color. Now, if you're unaware of that, if you change the hue of the color, you can kind of see here, we're right at a medium red. As we bring those reds down, they start to turn that magenta color that you see towards the end. And if we bring it up, those reds start to turn yellow. So you can this really kind of helps if you really want to get a selective white balance. Works great for blue skies and green grass, because a lot of times the camera gets stuck on which white balance it should choose when you have something really blue and really yellow, because basically what white balance is based off of is that warm and cool. So you can affect just the hue in here alone as you're doing your processing as well. It's just one less thing you have to worry about when you go into Photoshop and do the rest of the nitpicky details with it. Or if you are using Topaz Labs and you don't have something like Photoshop, this gives you complete control over all those colors, which is an awesome addition. And I kind of like what's going on here, so I'm going to leave it alone. But what I want to do is also show you how you can incorporate not just clarity, but also get something like Topaz Adjust and just finish this off, just polish off just a little bit. I'm not going to take it too far. I just want to show you something pretty cool. So This is pretty much Clarity in a nutshell. It's a nice tight little package of these very small amount of adjustments, and people get so overwhelmed by these programs where there's tons of stuff and they think that they got their money's worth just because they got 500 different slider adjustments. Well, sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's just that those 4 contrast sliders and that control that you have over the blacks, the midtones, and the whites, it can be extremely powerful. It doesn't have to be something so convoluted that you get perplexed every time you go in there. And that's what I like about it. It's not just clarity; it's simplicity. It's awesome. So let's go ahead and go to Topaz Labs and go to Adjust 5. I guess if they called it Topaz Simplicity, it'd be too close to Topaz Simplify. Anyway. So in Topaz Adjust 5, what I want to do here is another great program for HDR is Topaz Adjust, because you have a lot of different effects you can do with adaptive exposure and the detail within the image. So let's just go ahead and do one of my favorites, is Dynamic Pop 2. Again, it gets a little too dark in those areas, but we can go Dynamic Pop. Now, here's the before, here's the after. Just that one simple preset really pushed this to the next level. And that's what I love. Another one of my favorite presets that I created on here is under my collection. I go to Split Tone and Moody. It gives you more like a cross-processed effect, old vintage cross-process effect. So now you've got Clarity, you've got Topaz Adjust, and if you just put those into Photo Effects Lab, you've got yourself some pretty awesome, powerful software that you may never even need to go into something like Photoshop after having something like that. So let's go ahead and just go back to the HDR collection and put Dynamic Pop on there and just call it good. We'll call it a day with that. So again, my name is Blake Rudis and I'm with EverydayHDR.com. What I just showed you was my new 32-bit workflow. I might have to add. I just modified my 30-bit workflow for Topaz Clarity because it's so powerful. My new 32-bit to 16-bit HDR toning with Topaz Clarity and the addition of Topaz Adjust 5. So I cannot tell you enough how powerful this program is, and they don't pay me to do these things. I do these things because I like what they put out, what Topaz Labs puts out there to us, the webinars they give us and the awesome software that they give us. So we have to go ahead and give Topaz another round of applause for another awesome program. Not just an upgrade to something awesome, but a brand new program that does a lot for us. Have a great weekend. Get this software. It will help you in your 32-bit workflow, or even any workflow for that matter. You can use it with HDR files, single images, whatever. It's awesome. Take care, everyone.